So here's a few questions to start us off. Have you ever felt one down in a relationship that's supposed to feel equal? Have you ever been told that you're using power to get your way? Do you wish you could cultivate relationships based on consent and agreements instead of roles and assumptions? As relationship anarchists and solo polyamorists, we often seek out non hierarchical relationships. I'm here to suggest that non coercion is a good way to achieve that feeling of equality that we're looking for. Hi, I'm Nancy Shanteau, and I'm here to share with you about how we can use cooperative communication to analyze the power affecting our relationships, identify the ways people tend to power play each other, and negotiate how we use our power rather than just wishing it would go away. If you can see and hear me, please post in the comments and let me know. I'm going to wait until I can get confirmation that you all can hear me. Before I go any further, let me just make sure I'm on. Yes, I see myself. So just put in the comments if you can hear me, make sure that I'm audible. Yay! Hi, Eileen. Thank you. If you're watching this later, please type replay in the comments. I'll be putting y'all's comments on the screen during this broadcast. So if you prefer I don't share your comments, let me know that too. Hey, Eleanor, great to see you. Yay. Okay, let's get started. So here's the questions that we started us off with. Have you ever felt one down in a relationship that's supposed to feel equal? Have you ever been told that you're using your power to get your way? And do you wish you could cultivate relationships based on consent and agreements instead of roles and assumptions? As relationship anarchists and solo polyamorists, we often seek out non hierarchical relationships. I'm here to suggest that non coercion is a good way to achieve the feeling of equality that we're looking for. And let me include a content warning. There's going to be discussion of power plays, and I might mention violence or abuse, though there's not going to be an explicit discussion of these types of relationships. Today, we'll be focusing on how to identify power plays and how to respond to them. So that's what we're going to explore today. What is non-hierarchy? With roots in anarchism, no gods, no masters, non-hierarchy reflects anarchist conception of power structures as inherently oppressive. There's a long history of anarchists building movement organizations with governance that prioritizes autonomy over authority and free association over controlled movement. We have this focus on mutual aid, where we help ourselves, give when we have, and receive when we need. In our interpersonal relationships, as we attempt to apply these concepts, we stumble over the ways that the systemic structures, laws, regulations, and practices privilege some folks' identities over others and oppress others. I talk about privilege as immunity from the costs of oppression and access to unearned benefits at a system level, and oppression as exposure or targeting of those costs to particular peoples and identities and lack of access to unearned benefits. Writ large, these kinds of stacked decks leave people who might otherwise be equal with vastly different power levels. One of the things Beth Roy, one of the members of the Radical Therapy Collective, author of many books including Recentering and Radical Therapy the Second Decade, would say is that not wanting power does not make it go away. And Julia Keller, her founder of Skills for Change, would often say, we can't have equal power, so we aim for equal rights. So we're going to talk about how we do that. For that reason, if we want to achieve non-hierarchical relationships, we're better off identifying all the sources of power affecting us and then negotiate it in our relational dynamics. That's why I prefer to talk about non-coercion. If I ask for 100% of what I want, and you ask for 100% of what you want, we're much more likely to understand what each other is even up to, right? We can make agreements about how much time we spend together and get creative about how we use our time. Non-coercion also means we won't power play each other. We won't force somebody to do something they don't want to do or keep them from doing something they want to do. So that's a really key aspect of non-coercion. We're very explicitly defining how power used against somebody will show up. And because we can't make power go away, it's hard, non-hierarchy gets confusing because we're thinking, oh, I have to make the power go away, but I don't know how to do that, where we can actually know how to not coerce. So that's why I think this is a useful framework. Examples of power plays can include keeping secrets, telling lies, withholding information, rescuing, which means doing more than your share or more than you want to do, And then there's all these varieties of direct power plays, something like a manipulation or gaslighting, scapegoating, violence, abuse. So when we're talking about the, power plays, we're talking about making people do things they don't want to do and keeping them from doing things they want to do. And that definition is from Claude Steiner. He wrote a book called The Other Side of Power and was also a Radical Therapy Collective member. So we'll talk more about how we can respond to power plays in a moment. I have a fun graphic for you to take a look at. But if we're not power playing each other, what are we doing? How do we do that? Part of the process involves figuring out what we want, and we need to also figure out our expectations, limits, and boundaries. And then we have to communicate all of that with each other successfully. So we have to make sure that people understand what we mean. Often we'll use words, and people will have a different meaning for those words than we share. So some of that can be very challenging, especially when we're operating in non-normative relationship structures. So one of the challenges of alternative relational structures is we have this big burden of explaining all the ways we differ from norms. When there's limited time to do that kind of groundwork, and there's also new relationship energy, which is that feeling of being bonded and really excited about being connected to somebody, but also exhausted and depleted. It often will show up when we start engaging intensely with someone. It might mean we need more time to share how we're different, to slow down the early aspects of our connection and get to know each other better. So one of the great tools for that is the relationship smorgasbord. I'm going to put this up on the screen just so that you can get a sense of what this looks like. So Max Hill has diligently developed and updated the relationship smorgasbord, and all of the citations are on there. If you're interested, I'll put a link at the end. Which imagines a relationship as a potluck table. So you're imagining this as a table. There's all these dishes. You can select things off of the dishes. And by exploring the ideas on the smorgasbord, people can learn about what each other wants and also identify areas that aren't shared interests. It's kind of great to circle everything you'd like to do with a particular person. You can use a colored pen, and then they can do the same thing, and then you can look at where your crossover is. So we're starting to get, if we have these Venn diagrams, we're starting to get the crossover between this is what I want, this is what you want, and now we're operating within the crossover, so that we're all doing what we want together. For example, I really love visiting art museums, talking about art and making art. And one of my friends is just not interested in art museums. They love decorating their home. Their aesthetic is creative and beautiful. They love changing their space to be more artistic, but it's an architecture and space thing, not an art museum. They get this pained look on their face when I ask them if they want to go to a exhibit or gallery. I have an art buddy, on the other hand, who loves going on art dates with me. We go to art museums, we go to galleries, we go to art openings. We like to go to the arts open studio tours and shop for art and talk about art and make art. And it's just a completely phenomenal art adventure all the time with us. So that's a great example of how somebody who doesn't have a crossover with me on art is not going to be doing anything around art with me, whereas somebody who does is a good match. The other aspect of non-coercion is staying vigilant around the rescue dynamic. So I'm going to take this off the screen just so that I can, yeah, there we go. I personally don't want to engage in relational dynamics where people are doing anything they don't want to do. And rescue's very enticing, and it's the kind of power play that we end up doing when we really just want to help, or we want to make something better. We often will do more than our share or more than we want to do without negotiating around it in times of scarcity, danger, and competition. And that process ends up getting started in us when something is not going well. Maybe somebody is struggling or we're struggling, and we think, oh, this will fix it. But we don't negotiate about it. Maybe we don't have the time or energy to negotiate about it. Maybe it doesn't even occur to us. We just think, I'm just going to fix it. So if somebody's doing more than their share or more than they seem to want to do, it inspires in me starting to question, is this a choice they're making, or are they doing something that they feel like they have to do? I might even decline something that I'm not sure somebody wants to do. So if they seem hesitant, if they're saying yes, but I'm not sure they're engaged, because I don't want to be involved in something where I'm engaging in rescue on my end. And that's not the same thing as somebody saying yes with knowledge about, like, I want to do this, but I'm not enthusiastic about it. I'm not talking about non-enthusiastic yeses. I'm talking about patterns that start to emerge where it seems like this person is rescuing often and doing things they don't want to do. Um, Maybe that's not a good fit for us to participate in on the other side. So as a partner dancer, I love to do dips and lifts with people. And I also like to engage in a lot of consent. So at the beginning of a dance, I will learn how my partner wants to move with me during the dance. Sometimes a person has never been lifted or dipped and they're open to trying it. And other people seem really hesitant. When somebody seems hesitant, I might say, it's no problem. I won't lift or dip you. I only want to do lifts and dips when people feel like they're engaged and want to try, because it's a risky activity. So being able to know what your own expectations and standards and your desires are can help you decide whether or not something feels cooperative to you. So in role-based relating, this is what we don't want to be doing. We end up assigning responsibilities to the role. So we're married, therefore we share sexually with each other. We're married, it's your responsibility to take care of me financially. We're married, we live together, we sleep together, we eat together and spend all our time together. We're married, and that means you go with me to all my doctor's appointments when I'm diagnosed with cancer, right? So many people have different ideas about what a role in marriage might mean for themselves or the other person. And oftentimes those assumptions, even in normative relationships, haven't been checked. So we want to learn how to check those assumptions and figure out what actually people mean by what they say. The presumption that the norm is universally understood often causes people to fail to check their story with the other person. Many misunderstandings result from insufficient conversation about what everyone expects, and these misunderstandings can become insurmountable when the topic is high stakes. Non-coercive relating gets more confusing when we entangle our lives with other people. It becomes very important that we identify our expectations, boundaries, and standards for shared space and resources. When we have clearly articulated these values and preferences for ourselves, we're more likely to be able to communicate them with others and also enact our boundaries by creating space between ourselves and others when necessary. But think about it. When you're living with somebody and say somebody wants to have, loud music on in the living room, that is that space you, or is that space them? That, if you don't want to have to move your body away and you don't want to have to be present to the loud music and that's your space, it starts to get confusing, right? When you're in this entangled dynamic with someone, housemates as well as nesting partners, or, um, you know, we can start talking about hierarchical things like primary partners or, marital partners, spouses. So I said before that we talk about how we can respond when power plays happen. So let's talk about that now. Here's the image I said I would show you. This is come from Claude Steiner. The image shows the cover of his book, Other Side of Power, and a picture of Claude as well. The subtitle is How to Become Powerful Without Being Power Hungry. And there's a picture of Claude Steiner next to the image of the book. He's an older man with gray hair. The text says, Claude Steiner says a power play is when someone makes someone do something they don't want to do or keeps them from doing something they want to do. And we can respond in these ways. We can give in, fight, negotiate, ignore, and take collective action. So I'm going to go over these 5 types of responses to power plays. So I'm going to let this image go again. We can negotiate. So in which case the parties are negotiating the transaction and making a new agreement. We can give in, where someone being power played goes along with the power play. We can fight, in which the person being power played fights against the power play. Quitting the relationship is an example of fight, an extreme version of fighting. Ignore, in which the person being power played ignores that the power play happened. You just walk right on by. You can ignore a cat call on the street with that kind of response. So, and then taking collective action, where the person being power played seeks external help to stop the power play. This can look like individual or small group alliance with another person, hierarchical intervention, external organizational advocacy, legal action, or governmental intervention. This is where cooperative communication comes in. I defined cooperative communication in my talk yesterday, so if you're interested, you can go and watch that replay. And just to quickly recap, cooperative communication helps us create autonomy-based mutual agreements between two or more people where we ask for 100% of what we want 100% of the time, and we don't power play each other. We sometimes need to clear the air about the past, unprocessed feelings and stories. This process allows us to create a big picture story. You know what's going on for me, and I know what's going on for you. And we can then figure out what's happening in terms of power. We can do a power analysis and decide 100% of what we want and negotiate how that power is affecting our dynamic. Again, we're trying to aim for equal rights in our dynamics rather than trying to make power go away and failing to do that. So tell me in the comments, what's your experience with making non-hierarchy work in your relationships or not making it work? And what's challenging about it? And does this concept of non-coercion seem doable to you? Would it help you to achieve more negotiated power and equal rights in your relationships if you had tools like this available? So I'm interested in what you have to say in the chat. And I just want to say, I don't help people learn to communicate cooperatively. I also help people develop careers in this. I teach people how to guide people into cooperative communication. So if you want a career that's more aligned with your values, I currently have a summer session of the Cooperative Communication Practitioner Certification Program opening up right now. It's a 14-week program, and we're going to explore how people speak their truth, listen with compassion, and negotiate cooperative agreements to get more of what they want in their relationships. We'll do power analysis and work with internalized oppression. And we're going to start on June 12th, 2022. So that's coming up in a couple of weeks. There's going to be a bonus call with me on Saturday, June 11th. You'll get to experience future mapping, which is a guided visualization for your cooperative communication practice. When we envision something, and I'm not just talking about visual, I'm talking about felt vision and felt embodied vision. It's not just a mental exercise, it's something that we can feel. So we're going to be trying to navigate towards the future that we want using that felt sense. So anyone who's interested and wants to be able to align your work with your values to convey the skills of embodied power-informed relating to your community as a practitioner, facilitator, and teacher, this is a good program for you. By the end of the summer, you'll have a certification. Sarah has a comment. Let's see. That idea that it takes time to explain to new people that I don't live and love through role-based relating, and that my relationships are negotiated based on context, not hierarchy. Yes. When we're talking about hierarchy, people often think about, a hierarchical command and control structure where somebody's role has been assigned power and that power gives them authority. I think it's in our intimate relationships, it's less common for people to realize that they actually have assigned roles to their partners with these labels, spouse or live-in partner or nesting partner, that these labels are actually assigning people roles as well. We can attempt to negotiate all of those roles. We can, in Franklin Vo, who wrote More Than Two and also has been challenged on his abusive relational history by the survivors of his relationships. He talked about prescriptive versus descriptive hierarchy, and I'm very suspicious of that because the concept was that prescriptive was this assigned role. The role has a function and authority value, authority assigned to it, but we're operating in this descriptive way, and so that's not hierarchical. But it's not actually letting us then do a power analysis where we look at how does the power in the culture, the privilege and oppression that we're dealing with, how does that affect our relational dynamic, and what can we do inside of our relational dynamic to both acknowledge that power exists and mitigate its effects without also holding ourselves accountable for creating some sort of perfect bubble of protection from a culture that's highly oppressive, right? we're not saying that we can achieve that. We're trying to generate a concept of like everybody has a right to want what they want. Everybody has a right to ask for what they want. Um, Although if you've asked and asked and asked, that can become oppressive too. And I have a right to not listen. So we have this, right to engage. We have the right to not engage. We have, we're trying to create structures that encourage us to um, be operating from consent. So that means, if I don't want to do something to help you, maybe somebody else is willing to. We're starting to think about networks and community in as our relational support system rather than just putting all of that pressure on one individual. And I really see coupleism, this construct of our romantic relationship is the thing that's going to save us from these oppressive circumstances, as being very idealistic and also dualistic. And there's a lot of pressure in our culture that if you want to be happy, you have to find the one. And when you don't operate that way, when you're not trying to find the one, then we get to start, restoring our collective power and our collective structures of support. So, when we're operating in solo polyamory and relationship anarchy, trying to dismantle all these structures, we're really looking at re-engaging our community support systems in a different way, where we help us. So I'm going to put a couple of links in the chat. If you have any stories you'd like to tell or questions you have about how non-hierarchy can work in terms of non-coercion, how non-coercion can help you, or identifying power plays, identifying cooperation, I would be happy to continue to talk. And I also have another talk coming up on Thursday, the 26th. That's tomorrow at 3:10 Pacific, called Empowered Solo Negotiation. So we're going to keep talking about how do we do this with each other. And I'll put these links in the chat right now while you're watching. La la la. I'm also going to link to the smorgasbord for you, which Max Hill has been so great about keeping updated for us. Okay, here's the smorgasbord. And here is the Cooperative Communication program. I see another question. I'll come right back to you. Let me just put one more. You can get on my email mailing list. I just want to help you find me. Okay, I've put those quotes. So let me put Caroline. This is a great question or comment. So you said, my former partner was antagonistic towards any mention of relationship anarchy, despite implicitly wanting to define boundaries. I find that is common, actually, that people who aren't in an alt culture might really dislike the jargon of that culture. So I try to use common language when I can, even asking for 100%, we might say, like, can we talk about what we want, what our expectations, limits, and boundaries are? And then because we want to identify our desires too. We don't just want to talk about what we don't want. We really want to be talking about what we want. But you could put a list together of wants and don't wants. And you're using your culture to help you figure things out. And but I find that when people are outside of a culture, an alternative cultural structure, sometimes they can view it as a threat to how they want to do things or to their norms, and that learning about it feels to them like somebody is trying to power play them. So when that's happening, oftentimes what I would do is talk to them about the dynamic they want. Like what kinds, how do they want to share what they want? are they basically trying to rely on mind reading or um, relying on existing norms that might not feel good? And if you have feedback to give them, how do they want to get it? Um, when we're very, very different from how the norms are, people are going to have to learn about us. It puts the burden of education on us, and we don't want them to think that they get to do that. Um, that it's a normative dualistic approach that says that everybody knows what I mean when I say something. We've been trained into this culture of presumption, and that culture of presumption also overvalues the opinions and ideas and definitions of people who already have power. So that's a big conversation to have with somebody like, do you agree that external power structures in the culture is affecting how we relate with each other? And if you don't agree that that's true, how are you, you know, you're just assuming everybody else shares your values, shares your ideas, understands what you mean, that there's no requirement for us to communicate with each other. And that in that communication, if there's something that's happening where a dynamic is becoming skewed, somebody is consistently winning, that the person who is consistently losing has no choice other than to leave in order to address that. And that's a possibility. That's why I say, if you don't like how you're being treated, move your body away, because it's incredibly clear feedback. If talking hasn't been working, you can always move your body away. Ways to do that in shared space could be just taking a step back. That's actually really potent often, especially if you say, I don't like how I'm being treated or spoken with. I'm taking a step back. And then you can go to the doorway, you can leave the building or leave the room. In non-social space, if we're not in shared space, we can take a break. Like, I think I'm going to take a half an hour break right now. I'm not liking how this conversation is going, or how our dynamic is going, because we're actually saying, like, there are going to be consequences. There's natural consequences to um, you assuming that how you think about things is the way, right? Um, and the way I think about things is not the way. You need to find out about me if you want to, coexist in a cooperative way with me. And I need to find out about you. And we need to make sure that even, what we're saying, that we understand each other. I've done this for a long time. And sometimes I'll write a cooperative agreement down and then realize later we meant different things. And it's in the implementation of that agreement that we start to see how we're interpreting it. And we also get to see whether or not somebody is going to keep their agreements. Are they trustworthy? That's why I like to talk about trust-based relating. I hope that was helpful to you. Or, the disarming, if, disarming the defense often has to do with the person feeling threatened. So if it's possible in any way to say, what are your values? What do you want? Then we can start to come back to, like, I want this too. And this is how I would like to create it with you. How do you want to create it with me? Um, you know, we want to relate with each other. As long as we both want to relate, we're doing work in order to make that successful. Anyone else have any stories or examples of hierarchy, how it shows up in your relationships? Oh, Caroline said yes. Thank you. Thanks, Caroline. I appreciate your comments. Great. Um, I I kind of I hear people asking this question a lot in our, online spaces about, how do I do non-hierarchy? And I kind of cringe because I want our principles to be understandable and doable. And non-coercion is not a short word either. Um, it is, though, this idea of, we can track the power in how we relate with each other. We can figure out the power that comes with us, and the power of our context, and the power that is coming with the other person. And we can negotiate how it's affecting us. We can talk about that. We don't have to pretend like power's not there or pretend like things that aren't equal are. And we can also keep standing up for our individual rights. My right to speak what I want, and your right to speak what you want. Our rights to walk away, our rights to say yes and no. These kinds of things we can really cultivate an environment where people are able to ask for what they want and negotiate. And if we have contradictory, competing needs, that we can name that. We can say, "Oh, we're actually in a conflict over how we spend our time together." Um, I'll talk more about how we negotiate tomorrow, how we resolve those kinds of contradictions, and also how we don't. If we are not able to resolve them, what can we do? Um, you know, that every situation doesn't have a fix, and that's another fantasy in our culture, that there's a win available all the time. And I just want to support us to figure out how to relate in ways that really take care of our autonomy and also our collective care, to promote that collective mutual aid and care. So thanks for joining me. I'm going to complete here unless anyone else has something to say. I put a few links in the chat if you want other resources. I have tons of free resources. Just ask and I will keep responding in the chat after this recording is complete. Thanks so much for joining me, and I hope you have a relaxed and pleasant day contemplating power in your intimate relationships. Cheers.